Hi guys, for today's project you're going to need the following. You're going to need some pony beads. Now these are beads, or any other type of bead, sorry, that actually has a big enough opening so that you can actually thread some yarn through it. You're also going to need, obviously, yarn. I'm using just one strand of worsted weight yarn, and I also found one of my old needle, or I guess you call it needle, that has a big enough eye in it that you can thread the yarn through, and it'll make putting the beads on easier. Don't forget your loom hook, and I'm using the yellow Nifty Knitter loom for this. Or you can use any other Nifty Knitter that will at least let you cast on. I think it's 11 pegs we'll be using. But the first thing you need to do in order to prep for using beads is you're going to need to figure out how many you need for each row. And again, I'll have that information for this particular scarf pattern in a little bit. But the thing I wanted to show, a trick when you're adding beads, is if you have, again, this needle right here, and you thread your yarn through it, it makes it a lot easier to take the beads when you're ready and simply place them on. And then it's easier to slide them down through than trying to do that. Now what you're going to do for this one, I've put on already about 100 beads on this strand of yarn. And the idea is we're going to be dropping these in between these pegs as we do our pattern for the scarf. So it's important, and to make it a little easier, is to thread your needle with your yarn and put as many beads on as you want. I will have a final count of how many beads you should have on your project to start with. I'll have that listed right about here, and that'll tell you how many you should have on your yarn before we begin this project. As I mentioned, we're going to be using the yellow Nifty Knitter loom, but you can also use a smaller loom as long as you have the availability to have 11 pegs available to you. So you can use any size Nifty Knitter loom you want. The reason I'm using Nifty Knitter is because I want the gauge, the space between, to be wider than I normally do when I use other looms, such as the all-in-one loom. Typically, with the Nifty Knitter, we use 2 strands of worsted weight yarn, but because I wanted this to be a more spring/summer lightweight scarf or cowl, I wanted to just use 1 strand and beads on it for a different project. So again, I have stitch markers here. Those will come in handy for a later project. I have a yellow one on here just to remind me when I'm doing my cast on how many pegs. I'll remove this after I do the first row. So once you've got your beads on, again using your needle to help thread the beads on, just simply take it off the needle, and then you're going to do your normal cast on row. We're not doing any kind of fancy cast on row with this, and this is not going to be counted as the first row like I normally do. So do your little slip knot, place it on the first peg, and then just do your simple E-wrap cast on. Again, it's nothing particular today about doing any kind of fancy one. If you want to do a different fancy one, go right ahead. And again, I'm just E-wrapping until I get to my yellow peg, just to show me how many pegs I want to do. So once you get to here, if you have a stitch marker like I did, I'm going to just remove this because I don't need this anymore, since now I remember where I'm casting on. And we're going to push this down, and then work our way back up, obviously. And again, we're not using the beads yet. This is just our cast on row. The beads will come in handy in the next part. I'm keeping this pretty simple idea as usual, but you can obviously modify this any way you see fit. So after you do that, you do your simple knit over. And I apologize if the white on yellow is hard to see. I just want this to look nice after the beads, and I didn't want to use a darker yarn. Really simple. I don't want to do a lot of different stitches. I know that a lot of people want to learn different things, but sometimes I think simple is best. So after you get your cast on row done, simply push these down, and this is where we're going to add our first row of beads. Again, we're keeping it very, very simple. Now what you have is I have all my beads already on my yarn, as you can see, and the reason with having them already on there is now I can just slide them one at a time where I need them. So I'm taking my first bead up, and it's getting ready so it can drop right before, and I know it's hard to see because it's a clear one, but we're dropping it right there and then wrapping the next peg. You're going to bring up your next bead. Again, it's going to be tricky to do because the beads will weigh down your yarn. So now we're going to bring up the next one, Here it comes. Do-do-do. And do the same thing. Drop it right into the next spot and wrap the next peg. You're going to be knitting this over, but I just wanted to show you the process. You're going to drop a peg, wrap the next peg. Again, for me, I just gotta find my... Where'd it go? There we go. Grab the next peg. Here it comes. Drop it into the spot between. Wrap the next peg. We're keeping, again, very, very, very simple, and we're going to do a cool technique in a minute to give it a little more style with it being summer. Now, if you didn't want to drop a peg every space, then you wouldn't need as many, or if you didn't want to drop a bead between every space, then just calculate how many new you need. Here comes our next one. Okay, it's being stubborn. Bring it down, placing it in between the two pegs, and then wrapping the next one. Continue that to the end of this row. Once you get to the last peg in the row, as you can see, we've got all our beads lined up. Go ahead and knit over. This helps lock the beads in place. And that is your first row. Push them down. It's going to look really pretty as this goes down, but again, that's our first row of beads locked in. Now for the second row, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to be adding beads on each row, and it may seem like they're really close together, but we're doing something a little different this time. We've done our cast on row, we've done one row just plain knit. Now we're going to turn around and do a little trickiness to it. We're going to incorporate the drop stitch. And this is something that you will have to pay attention to. And I'm just trying to get some of my beads already up here so that I don't have to fight to get them up there later. And again, you only need, I believe it was 10 per thing. So I'm bringing some beads up. And we're going to do a drop stitch pattern on our way back first. And if you remember what a drop stitch is, we're going to drop our bead in between like we did before. Excuse me. Wrap that one peg. Knit it over. Wrap it again, and one more time. You want 2 wraps. Leave it alone. And go on and move to the next peg. Again, dropping a peg, or a bead, sorry. Wrapping your next peg. Knitting it over. Now wrap it twice. Grab your next bead and bring it up. Drop it in between the two again. Wrap your next peg. Knit over. Wrap twice. Continue this till you get to the end of the row. When you get to the last peg, it's a little different. We worked it all the way over, and I'm just going to find my last peg I want to use. Okay, and we're going to drop the bead and wrap the last peg. We're not going to worry about double wrapping it again. We're just going to wrap it and then knit it over. Now what I want you to do, because it should look like this, you're going to go back on each peg and you're going to pull the top 2 loops off. Let me zoom in here so you can see. We're going to take, we have 3 loops on here, we're going to take these top 2 and remove them. That's what's going to help with our drop stitch. It's going to look weird for now. It's going to look very, very loopy. But that's doing the drop stitch. Now we're going to do something kind of cool. We are now going to take, excuse me, and you see how I have the stitch markers here? You're probably wondering, why are those there? Well, what I want to do is I want to take the loop, skip your first peg, take this loop over to this peg that's got the stitch marker on it. We're going to create a little bead cluster here. I'm going to take this loop over to that loop. Now come out to the other side and get this loop and bring it over to that loop. Leave it alone. We're not going to do anything with that right now. We're just going to leave it like that. Now do the same thing. You see the next set that we have? Take the one beside it, move it over, the other one on the other side, and move it over. And we have one last one over here to do. That's why we cast it on 11 pegs. We needed to be able to do one on each side and still have our end pegs. Be careful not to lose any loops that I've moved over. Okay, now push this all down, find your yarn, which is back here, and do one row of regular knit. We're going to lock what we just did in place. And you're going to wrap every peg. So wrap that one, and as you're doing it, go ahead and take all the loops that you put on this one and knit over. I'm just moving this out of the way. And that helps lock that in place. Again, you're going to wrap the empty pegs. Till you get to the next with more loops on it. And take those bottom loops right over. Again, you should have your empty pegs wrapped. And wrap your empty pegs. And that's the next row that you completed. And this may not show up right away what it's doing, but what we're actually creating is when this comes down a little further, we'll have little clusters of beads. But you can't see it right now because we haven't worked the project down far enough. We're going to leave that alone. And we just did our straight E-wrap knit. Okay, so now what we want to do, because we want a little space in between doing all these beads, because we'll see how this works, we're going to now do just a couple rows of regular E-wrap knit, just so there's a little more space between our beads before we do another set of beads. So I'm pushing all the beads out of my way of the yarn, and I'm just going to quickly wrap and do 2 rows of E-wrap. And that noise you hear is the beads hitting the floor. Okay, and then just knit over. Again, there's one row. Push it down. Now one more row of E-wrap, and then we can start the process again with the beads. them down for the next time you go through. And as you can see, it's coming down a little further on this side, so you can kind of see what we're doing here. We're creating that cluster of beads in the middle, creating a cluster over here, and that's how it should start looking. There's big, huge gaps. And again, I wanted this to be a lot more open of a scarf. I wanted it to be kind of something fun with the beads. And as you can see, it's going to be very open, but we have our clusters of beads in sections. So I thought that would be really cute and definitely quite different. And it makes noise. Okay, so now what we want to do is we're going to do the same process of the drop stitch again, using beads again. So the same thing we did before of the drop stitch is what we're going to do this time. However, this time we're only going to wrap each peg once after we do the bead. So again, you're going to drop the bead, wrap the next peg, get some more beads ready here. Knit over, rewrap one more time, grab a bead, and drop. Sorry about that. So you drop your peg, and again, we're only wrapping them one time, as you can see. So we drop the peg, wrap, you knit over that one, rewrap it just once, grab another bead, where'd it go? Okay, the bead's really fighting me. They usually don't fight me this much. Where'd it go? We already wrapped it. We're going to drop it in between, go to the next peg, knit, wrap it one more time, grab the next peg, drop it in between, wrap the next one, knit over, wrap one more time, grab the next peg or the next bead, drop it, wrap it, rewrap it. Continue this to the end of the row, except don't do it on the last peg. So we're to the last couple two for that row. We've already dropped it there. Just to show you again, dropped it, we wrap it. Knit it over. Wrap it one more time. And we don't worry, we gotta get one more bead. And get it without falling all over the place. Drop that. And then just simply wrap. Remember, we don't do the extra wrap on that. That constitutes one row. And go ahead and go back and take just the top loop off of all these. That is one row. For the next row, we're going to do the same thing we did before, where we move pegs over. We're going to see our stitch marker. We're going to go to the one on this side and the one on this side, and we're going to move them onto this peg. This is another row. Flip it over. Go ahead and move this one over. Push them down, because again, you're not doing anything with them until you bring your yarn over. Find the next one with the stitch marker, bring your loop over, bring the one on this side over. push them down so you have room to rewrap, and go to your last one here. Get over here. Now for your next row, we're going to just do 2 rows of regular E-wrap, making sure we wrap all the pegs that are now empty as well. So this time it's starting up here. You're going to wrap all the pegs going across, and if you want to, as you're working your way across, when you hit these with the other extra loops, just take all the bottom ones over the top again. And then continue wrapping. There's 1 row of E-wrap. Okay, and then I'll go back through and do another row. Push everything down out of your way. Go back through and wrap it all and do an E-wrap. This time you don't have to worry about the extra ones. Just go right ahead. Just wrap your way right back up. Now if you want to try incorporating other stitches in this, you can go ahead. I just wanted, for this first time using something with a lot of beads, there to be a little bit of a little bit of simplicity to it, because you are going to be moving loops over and you're going to be adding beads. I didn't want to add in a lot of other type of stitches besides E-wrap. Okay, so there's the next row. Okay, and then push them all down. If we can. And as you see, as it's coming through, we get a really cool kind of web design. I almost think it's like a spider, but I love the beads, and the beads should definitely sparkle pretty good when you are outside. And again, it's got big gapes in them. I mean, this is a spring type summer scarf, and you can choose to make it just a scarf, or you can choose to put the 2 ends together and make it like an infinity scarf. But I'm just working it as like a really cool, very open scarf. So now we're going to repeat that same process over and over and over. After completing the process of the pattern for at least another 13 times, I've got the length I roughly want. I'm going to turn this into more like a cowl, then I'm actually going to use it as a scarf. If you wanted to keep doing it as a scarf, then obviously keep doing the same series over and over again until you get the length that you want. But I decided to turn it into a cowl. So what I've also done is, just before I'm getting ready to join it, I did 10 rows of E-wrap knit, just regular E-wrap knit. This is the part that will kind of go behind your neck. Not too many people will see anyway. And I just have to do my last row of E-wrap knit. Now to turn this into a cowl, we're going to do a similar thing we did with my Just in Time for Spring Affinity scarf that I will probably have a link maybe right about there too. And we're going to bring up the beginning row. So again, you do your pattern over and over till you get the length that you want. Then you do 10 rows of just regular E-wrap knit. And now we're going to go back and find the beginning pegs, or the beginning loops. The first thing you want to do is make sure your project is all facing the same way, otherwise you'll end up with a twist in it. You could decide to have a twist in it, but I don't. So we're going to go back to the beginning, which is way back here, and I lost it. Hang on a second. Let's do that again. Alright, way back to the beginning. Here it comes. It's very pretty, isn't it, with all the different colors and that. Very nice kind of spring flowery one. Now remember, we only did 1 row of E-wrap knit, so we have to grab our first rows way back here and bring it up into the loom. Now this is the part that's going to be a little tricky, so let me try to zoom in here. You're going to look for the beginning loops that you did, the first row we did, and we're going to place those back on the pegs, just like we did with the other scarf we did. You're going to go through and find all these loops and do your best to put them back on the pegs. If you don't have enough loops, all you do is end up making two pegs share a loop. I've done that before too. Stretch it out and let two of them share one. Okay. The other thing you can do is if you got one left, all you have to simply do is even move that over one. It's not going to affect the look of it too much. So since I couldn't stretch anymore, I'm just going to bring this one over to that one. Now what I'm going to do is just take the bottom loop over the top. This is going to lock our beginning into our pattern here. Because this one has two, I'm going to make sure I take both the bottom loops that I started out with. And go over the top, bottom. Again, this is locking it as one in place. Now what I like to do is go through one more time with your working yarn that we have and knit this one more time. Again, this is just another way to help lock it in place before. Push them down. What that did is it locked the beginning of the project and the end of the project together as one to make a tube. Now what we need to do is take this off the loom. What I'm going to do is just a basic knit bind off, and I'm going to use my working yarn as I go around. And all I'm going to do, if I can get it to work here, is wrap the next peg, knit it over, move the first loop I had over to that one, that over. I'm going to wrap the next peg here. This is a little different than doing the crochet bind off that we normally do, but it's going to bind off the project so that it will be one. So it's a little different bind off than I normally do, just for something different. And we get into the last pegs. This isn't quite, like I said, it's not quite a crochet bind off, it's not quite a knit bind off, it's just something a little different. But either of those other two bind offs will work as well. Okay. Now we need to cut some extra yarn, and we need a crochet hook if you can. Now see, with that kind of bind off, we got a nice tighter bind off, and I'll show you that in a minute. Oops, we gotta take this loop off. Gently go through so you can remove your loom. Now, because there's a lot of weight of the beads, so you're going to want the beads up on a table at this point so they're not driving you nuts. Replace the hook with a crochet hook. I'm right-handed, so I gotta switch sides. We got the extra yarn. We're gonna go through another loop nearby. Pull that through. Grab our working yarn. Pull that all the way through. And now all you're gonna simply do is make a couple knots. You want to make sure they're secure. And then once you got it secure, just go ahead and shorten it. And you could turn it inside out. Just simply turn it like that. And we got a nice kind of gathered bind off. It's got a little different look to it than a normal bind off, but you can do the knit bind off or the crochet bind off, because this is the part that's going to be more towards your neck anyway. And then you've got your nice springtime cowl. Either side, the way you want to do it. You can do this side, have more of the pegs, or the more of the beads showing, or you can have it this way, which doesn't show as many. But there is our nice, cool little cowl.